This is Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon and the richest person in the world with a net worth of $200 billion by 2020. It's easy to say that number, but not as easy to really understand how much it is. For that, let's do an experiment. If I made $1 every second, I would make my first million in less than 2 weeks. Huh, so much for pulling on my bootstraps. But to earn my first billion, I would have to wait almost 32 years. And to get to those $200 billion that Bezos has, I would have to wait 6,300 years. It's the equivalent of me starting to earn $1 every second since the days the Egyptians started scribbling. By the time this video is over, the net worth that Bezos has would have increased by $1,500,000. But let's cut the crap. You've probably already heard these type of statistics, which can then be compared with problems such as the number of people living on the streets, even while ignoring the pandemic we are in this apocalyptic year. The question is, do you know how people like Bezos made those fortunes? In the end, it's so easy to say, oh, he's over there with so much money, and I'm here trying to pay rent this month. If we want to solve that question, we have to start with the basics, and for that, we have to go to economics. Now, economics, as well as other sciences, tries to give ever more detailed answers to simple questions, and one of these is about the value of things. Imagine that you go to the store and decide to buy some headphones, which will cost you $30. Where did that price come from? In that case, let's think about why something costs what it costs. Let's say you have a pair of headphones and a fork, two more or less different things. How can you compare their value? It's not just thinking about the price difference, if the headphones are more expensive or by how much, because you end up with the same question of why do they cost that? So, what ties them together? Well, the answer is that someone had to produce both objects. Someone worked assembling the headphones and someone worked shaping up the fork. In other words, the value of these commodities depends on the labor required to produce them. Here, we begin to understand more things. Why are headphones worth more? Because they are more complicated to put together. They have small electronic components that are more difficult to manufacture than a fork. But there is still another question. How do you compare this difference in labor to produce one or the other? Well, if something is more complicated to put together, it takes more time to produce it. And it is that working time, those labor hours, that can be compared. At this point, it can already be said that, for example, if the labor hours to produce 100 forks is the same number of hours to produce a pair of headphones, then they are both worth the same. This is where someone says, whoa, slow down, egghead. You're forgetting the cost of materials, tools, utilities, all that to produce those objects. And, well, not exactly. Let's take a quick look at some of these for the fork. For that, let's think about how to make one. It takes steel and shaping it. That steel had to be mined, melted, formed into plates, and finally shaped. In this case, someone invested hours of their work in each process. Those hours that were invested, even if it were less than an hour, is added to the value of the fork, and so on with transportation, sales, utilities, and so on. Did you understand all that? Well, don't worry if you didn't. If you want, rewind the video, but just remember that the value of all things comes from the labor of the people. You generate value with your work. As much as you throw bills at a piece of metal, it won't magically transform into a fork without someone to work it. Now, maybe you noticed something. The initial question was, why does something cost what it does? And that is a question of price, while for much of this talk we have talked about value. Well, it turns out that the price of a commodity is a representation of the value in what we know as money. These prices may fluctuate due to the forces of supply and demand, but they will be oscillating until they reach a central price, which should be close to the value of the product. And that is assuming that the law of supply and demand is fulfilled. And, well, maybe not, but okay, let's assume that it is. Whoa, this is super interesting, but what does it have to do with Bezos and the billionaires? Well, it's that, as they've told us so many times, it is they who create the jobs and hire us to work. So, it is time to talk about wages. Imagine that you don't have a job. And they're gonna hire you in a fork factory to keep the previous example going. Your boss is gonna try to increase his own earnings, and for that, he will hire the person who he can pay the least. Congratulations, it's you! Your job is to control the machine that shapes up the forks. That same machine we were talking about back then. So, what is the most basic stuff you need to work as a human being? You need to eat, sleep, some recreation, and also the education to understand how the machine is used. Each of these things has a value, and therefore a price. And with items like these, is that the minimum wage is calculated, for example. In other words, in theory, the minimum wage should cover the basics to survive, but we already know that in practice it is not. This minimum wage also implies the minimum cost that your boss would have to pay so that his employees can work. But let's say your boss does pay you a little above minimum wage and what you receive is just enough to survive. With that, you go to work. You walk into the fork factory and you remember, your work creates value, and that value adds up to every fork you make. Your shift is normally 8 hours, but let's say that at the 4th hour you realize something. The value that you have made with your work up to that point is the same value of what you need every day to eat, drink, and rest. And you think, oh, how wonderful! So since I already did my part to pay for my needs, I can go home now and be with my family, right? But nope. They hired you for 8 hours, not 4. So get back to work. That means that those additional hours of work that you are doing, but that no longer cover for your survival, are more than needed. It is a surplus. Let's call that extra value the surplus value. And thus, we get to the billion-dollar question. Where does the surplus value that you're producing go to? Well, the answer is obvious. Your boss looks happy down on you as you're making him richer and richer. But wait, there is more. There are several tricks that your boss can use to get you to make more surplus value in the same time. One option is to work harder, and better yet if it is by your will. Why do you think it's kinda common to say, I'll sleep when I'm dead? Or alternatively, it may not be exactly by your will, but by playing with the fear of being unemployed. After all, you have to be grateful that you have a job, right? Other creative ways in which your boss ends up getting more surplus value from you is by reducing the cost of hiring you. A simple example is the fact that workers at some shared transport companies work as independent contractors, which ends up with them not receiving their benefits. That is basically the whole gig economy in a nutshell. But a not so obvious way is to reduce the cost of the machinery and utilities that the company uses. For example, an Uber driver wears out their personal car instead of a car the company gave them. And what if your work is on a computer? Here, the pandemic ignited the creativity of your boss by switching to the so-called work from home. After all, you're wearing down your personal computer and using the utilities of your home instead of the facilities that your boss would have paid for in renting an office. And this is assuming that you're not working more hours than you did before, thanks to the ease of access to your computer. When you add up all these factors over several years, you get results like Jeff Bezos living in a $175 million house, or 5.5 years of receiving $1 a second, while his workers have to pee in bottles to stay productive. Here are some images of guillotines which have nothing to do with what we are talking about. This is a very brief summary of what is the labor theory of value, developed by Karl Marx in... Wait, did you just say Marx? No, it is
this radical postmodern Marxist.
They have deceived us! Ha, I'm joking. That labor theory of value was mainly raised by Adam Smith, recognized as the father of capitalism in his most recognized work, The Wealth of Nations of 1776. What Marx did was to continue developing the theories of Smith and David Ricardo until he discovered the logical conclusion of wage labor in that value that you produce outside of what you're paid for, the surplus value. And here is where we will be taking a break for the day. Certainly, what we have talked about in these minutes is a summary of a much more complex economic analysis, which, if you're interested, there will be more information to read in the description of this video and on this YouTube channel, I Wanna Work. Also, you probably have more questions about what you've seen, from how did we get to this system on a historical level, to how to improve it or destroy it. Sorry. In that case, write a comment on the video about your doubts or even what topics you would like to learn more about, and it would be great to present them in another video. If you want to support this project, send us any pennies you have to our Patreon page, or if you want to help once, to the link in the description of the video. Like this video if you liked it, dislike it if not, share it, and subscribe to I Don't Wanna Work. Also, follow us on social media so you know when the next video comes out. Bye bye!